morning, and you are very welcome to today's CBI at 10 webinar. My name is Kerry Thomas. I'm an editor at a new startup called Tortoise, and it's a great pleasure, as ever, to be hosting these things with the CBI. As you know, I think the CBI does a lot of research and produces a lot of important evidence about the British economy. But there's one statistic that the CBI came up with before the pandemic, which has stayed with me ever since, and actually the CBI has been repeating it more recently, which is that by 2030, 90% of the UK's workforce will need to gain new skills. And pre-pandemic, again, the estimate was that that was going to cost £13 billion a year. So that's a big figure and a short time frame. But the thing that strikes me now is that we've come to think of the pandemic as an accelerant. It may not send us off down a completely new path, but we'll be going faster down the one that we're already on. So I wonder what that 13 billion a year would be now. And I wonder, is 2030 still the date by which 90% of us will need those new skills? All of which is to say that skills, training, retraining, lifelong learning, that whole basket of things have never, ever been more important than they are right now, particularly at this stage, I think, of the recovery from the pandemic. So not talked enough about our politicians, not talked enough, I would say, about by the media, with my media hat on, but we've got the chance to talk about them today with a great cast list of people, so let's do that. We have with us Tony Danker, Director General of the CBI. We've got Catherine Foote, who's Director of Insights at the Phoenix Group. We've got Linda McVeigh, who's Director of Skills and Capability at Leonardo, and we've got Neil Morrison from Severn Trent Water, Director of Human Resources there. As ever on these things, more than ever, I would say, the most important thing is to hear from you. So do send in questions, comments, any thoughts, put them into the chat. We'll bring as many of them into the conversation as we can. They really help me. They really help the CBI, I think, to understand what's happening at grassroots level. So it's a real service, not just to this conversation, but more widely as well, if you can keep us across everything that you're thinking and hearing. And if you want to put something in anonymously, then just write ANON at the top of it, and we will treat it confidentially. But Tony, a lot to talk about. So let's tuck in. Can I just begin with you, because actually there's a lot going on. That, you know, the way events are coming at us, we'll be dealing with a plague of frogs by next Monday. But what's on your agenda this week, Tony?
Yeah, by the way, I'm still processing, Kerry, the fact that 90% of us need to reskill. I make that 4.5 of the people on this call will need to reskill, but I'm looking at screen. I'm wondering who gets off with the half. It's an unbelievably busy time. You know, this was supposed to be the time when, in a V-shaped recovery, it was all a sort of just nice growth story. And hopefully we were post-pandemic, and hopefully, you know, the country would return to growth and everything would reopen. And actually what you're seeing with the energy story over the weekend is you're seeing the real growing pains in the rebound post-pandemic. And it started with labor shortages. We've obviously got supply chain shortages, and now gas prices. And in a way, all of it's part of the same story, which is what happens when you rebound after a pandemic. And all of us are going to be managing this, and we'll talk about what it means for people, particularly on this call. But when you think about gas prices in particular, and what's probably going to be happening, what the business secretary is doing with the industry and many of our members today, I think what you're going to need, and I think the Prime Minister set up, you know, a sort of cabinet committee to get at it, which we want to turn into a real task force with business, is you're going to need the government to really help with industry manage through these things in a pragmatic and non-ideological fashion, right? So we've really got some squeezes now on supplies. We've really got squeezes on prices and gas with a potential inflation risk, and we've really got, you know, squeezes on labor shortages. So we need a deeply engaged and pragmatic government to work with us to get through that. So look, I'm very happy to talk more about energy prices. I've been reading it all weekend, as I'm sure everyone has, and talking to many of our members. But I think actually that's sort of the governing theme. The governing theme of the next few weeks is about really managing the rebound so that we can get to that recovery that we all want to get to. So I think that's probably top of mind. As for today, Kerry, you know, we are having a transforming work week because it's deliberately timed, and Amy and our team will put the list of events in the chat so that everybody can see them. We've got a whole week around transforming work. This is the month where most people are back into hybrid work. And so it just felt like this was the right time. Today, obviously, we're talking about skills, and thank you, by the way, Catherine and the Phoenix Group for supporting today. But we've got hybrid working, we've got skill shortages, we've got diversity and inclusion. And I think if you're in the business of our panelists at the moment, it's an incredibly busy time to be working on the people agenda. And there's going to be a lot that's happening that we want to focus on this week. So that's why we're doing skills this week. But as you say, it's one of the issues of many about coming back from the pandemic.
And how does this align, do you think, with the government's agenda on skills at the moment?
Look, skills policy in the UK has bedeviled everybody for a long time. And the reason I think, and it'd be great to hear what people in our panel think and what people listening think, is the demand side and the supply side are mostly completely disconnected, right? So government manage most of the supply side in terms of, pre-entry to the workforce and to some degree supporting lifelong learning. And the demand side is us as businesses. So the skills that we want and need turns out to be only one factor that government, who mostly manage the supply side, generate. There was a great anecdote the other week. We had, I think it was the West Midlands, we had members gathered around, and there was somebody who ran an FE college who said, we've set up an electric vehicle maintenance qualification, which seems to be absolutely perfect for the emerging economy we're going to need. There were very few sign-ups, and so essentially they had to cancel the course because the government incentives were about bums on seats rather than the skills needs of the economy. Now, you can sort of understand why everybody behaves like they behave in that situation, but it's really suboptimal. We then have an apprenticeship levy, which has a really good objective in mind, which is essentially to improve the quality and professionalism of apprentices, which everybody has to support. But it turns out to have turned into a tax on lots of businesses who are not using the money on apprentices, so it becomes a tax rather than a levy. And the idea of a skills levy, so that every employer can be tackling exactly what you described, Kerry, that 90% reskilling challenge, sounds like a great idea, except it's just not being used that way. So yes, I think we don't have a good enough dialogue with government. They've obviously got a bill now in Parliament working its way through in the year ahead that's trying to address it, but it's only really scratching on the surface. So what's the implications of all of that? Number one, we all are going to have to take hold of the skills issue ourselves because it's a reskilling challenge. That's the short run need, and hopefully we're going to talk about that today. And in the long run, we need to have a better dialogue with government about long-term skills policy. We've just had a change in Education Secretary. If you signed up to hear Gavin Williamson this morning, you'll know that he's no longer in his job. I don't think the two are connected. But Nadeem is coming in, and Nadeem is a very, very experienced, pro-business, business-friendly education minister. So hopefully that longer-term issue around the supply and the demand side we can get into. But don't wait for that. If everyone's been waiting a long time for UK skills policy to improve, in the short run, get involved in your own retraining exercise and in some of the stuff we're doing on the white paper.
Okay, and Tony, just give me a couple of specifics. If I'm, you're never keen just to blame the government. Business has to look to itself, as you've just been saying. Solutions here. What are the practical steps that I could take if I'm running a small, medium-sized business to make my presence felt in this whole reskilling area?
Yeah, look, so first of all, by the way, we are really keen to hear from you if you want to begin to access some of either the skills hub policies in regional skills centers, or if there's any help you need to be connected to what's going on right now and the stuff that's connected to the bill, just get in touch with us and we'll connect you into that. But your broader point is, look, we need to engender a belief in reskilling. Lots of employers that I've spoken to are kind of like, why should I reskill workers when I could lose them? But actually, the work that we've done, the analysis we've done shows that basically you're talking about a 75% ROI. What I mean by that is in 75% of cases, the ROI for investing in reskilling people pays off. And in my experience, it'd be great to hear what Linda, Neil and Catherine say. Most employers are reskilling their workforce because it's the cheaper, more effective way to build new skills. And yes, there might be times where you lose some, also times where you gain some, but on the whole, the investment in reskilling pays off. So I think this idea of understanding and believing in reskilling your workforce and not being obsessed about losing some on the edges, I think is incredibly important. And then secondly, I think we're getting smarter, and I'm sure Neil and Linda will talk about this. We're getting smarter at what I call the natural adjacent skills journeys. In other words, I mean, you're not going to turn a baggage handler into a butcher, right? But probably there are natural skill journeys where people can really move from essentially one career track to another career track with a targeted investment in skill building. And I think those journeys, if you're an SME in particular, understanding what people are experiencing, actually SMEs, I suspect, probably have been doing this for a lot longer than big companies, perhaps, because they've just had to be more nimble with workforce. But understanding what those transitions are, understanding the latent potential in your existing workforce and how you can move them across the skills for the future, and understanding that's not a revolutionary journey, it's actually quite a credible one. I think that's what's critical for firms to understand and get underneath in the coming months.
Fantastic, Tony. I'll come back to you shortly to talk about the apprenticeship levy. I want to touch on that directly, but let me go where you're kind of steered us towards this idea of reskilling and that thought that maybe myself feel slightly queasy that maybe we haven't always been as convinced of people's potential to learn new skills as we might have been. And let me pick that up with you, Linda, from Leonardo in the first instance, if I may. What's your journey been like on that sort of reskilling things? You must invest very, very heavily in skills and training in the business that you're in.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, and I think that Leonardo, like many companies in our sector, we've got a long history of investing in skills, and I think that we're probably a net contributor, in fact, to the UK skills economy, if you like. So we're not starting this from we're not coming at this from a standing start. It's something we've always done, but I think that there are a number of points that were touched on there about reskilling that are really significant now. I think there's been a massive change in culture and expectations of work that has happened not just across the pandemic. It began before that, but what we're seeing is definitely an accelerated effect of that. So I think now there is an expectation that you may have several careers or several roles within your working life, and if your current employer is not going to support that, then you'll go somewhere else. So for me, there's no choice but to upskill and reskill our people. Also in my sector, we have a long history of loyalty from our employees. So we have people with us who've been working for us for 40 years. Now, there is no way that the people who we employed 40 years ago and have done great work for us in the past, there's no way that their skills are remaining current unless we are actively doing something with them. So we are being very proactive about how we upskill and reskill our people. And it's not just in the sort of traditional skills that you would expect. It's in digital skills. Digital has really come to the fore, and I think that's where a huge focus for us lands. So things like AI, certain aspects of software. We're looking at things like VR, big data, all of those kinds of things that are relevant to us, and we are having to bring those in. We're doing it through affiliated partnering rather than relying on our internal expertise, because that in that way we get the best knowledge and expertise brought into our industry. So it's a period of massive change, and I think that is definitely partly to do with the pandemic, but not uniquely so. The other thing I would say is that unless you're prepared to work with your existing workforce, you simply cannot go out and get the shiny new skills off the shelf that you might otherwise do and you may want to do. And certainly if we're relying on the numbers of young people coming through as graduates or apprenticeships, we know the numbers just don't match. The requirement now is massive. We've always struggled to get the skills that we need in our sector, but it's much bigger and much worse now than it ever was. So really you need to focus on sorting your own workforce out before you can begin to think about whether the government is providing us enough of a supply chain coming through the skills route.
Yeah, and Linda, I'm always keen on these calls to look for sort of concrete examples of what you've done that marks that change. So just again, going back to this point that Tony started us off with, the lifelong learning, the reskilling that you've been mentioning throughout a career. Can you think of options that would now be open to one of your mid-career people that just weren't there 10 or 15 years ago?
Yes, we've developed, excuse me, we've developed a cellular offering, if you like, to our workforce, and it's called Skills for the Future. And it allows them to dip in and out of exactly the kinds of things that I mentioned earlier, artificial intelligence, machine learning, cloud computing, and software reskilling. So all of those things are available now to our employees that weren't before. And they're available in a way that allow employees to dip in and out as and when they need it. I think the other thing that's changed dramatically is the requirement for a qualification up front will get you through the door, but you need to be able to maintain and upskill yourself on a regular basis. That demand is just there now. It's not an option. So the route to doing that has to be flexible. It has to be at a time and at a pace that suits the employee and that suits the business, so they can actually gain the skills when they need them, rather than being sent away on another course or something. It needs to be there on their laptop.
Great. Catherine, let me come to you. So you're in finance rather than defence, but how have you at Phoenix, how have you interpreted that reskilling challenge? What does that, again, in concrete terms, what's that mean to you, and what have you done about it?
Gosh, a few things, I suppose, Kerry. I think one thing, working in the long-term savings and retirement business, we're very aware of longer lives and longer life expectancies that we're all experiencing in the 21st century now. And so trying to support, colleagues with what could comfortably be 50-year careers nowadays, the reskilling agenda couldn't be more important, and doesn't become less important the older you get. So I think one thing in particular that Phoenix is interested in is how we can support people to develop second, third, fourth careers, to reskill in midlife and later. We're developing with others in the industry and with government something called a midlife MOT, where you provide a holistic offer for people in midlife that looks not just at a proper career conversation, a skills conversation, but combines that with a conversation about their health and well-being and about their personal finances. So they can really think holistically about where they are in their life at that point, what future life and work lies ahead for them, and what new skills and training opportunities could deliver them ultimately the life and then the retirement and the post-retirement life that they want.
Great, I hadn't heard of that before, and it sounds really, really interesting. The pandemic, as we mentioned, accelerates the number of trends, perhaps does bring new challenges. I imagine in your field, hybrid working is something that might be of interest to the number of people who work for you. What does that bring to the debate about reskilling, do you think?
Well, I mean, I'm sure, like everybody, we've seen an absolute sea change in an acceptance of digital learning opportunities as being something people are prepared to do and engage in, and offers actually in that space that are fun to do, that work, that actually work. Sitting here even 2 years ago, I think uptake of digital learning offers would have been, online courses would have been just utterly much lower than it is now. And yes, in terms of hybrid working, I think different parts of the business have different needs. Of course, it's a complex company, but absolute, commitment from our side towards, flexible working for people, and thinking about how it's not just about where do you work. It's not just about, are you in the office or are you at home. It also has huge opportunities, I think, for instance, for people who might, for reasons of of health, of caring needs, of other needs outside the office hours in their life, to work in a different place or work in a different way, to try and be able to offer that for people so that we can retain them, I think is critical. I'd say though, I mean, it's obvious really, isn't it? But the best package of digital, structured training opportunities you can provide for people is great, and it's important, but it's absolutely no substitute for what you were saying earlier, Tony, about a genuine belief across the management, the middle management of a company, about the value of reskilling. The value of the return on investment you can get, good line management, real commitment to diversity and inclusion, to proper career conversations, to manageable workloads that give people the space to take up these sorts of opportunities. So it's almost, inside the company, I think there's a supply and demand issue. You were talking about, government supply, Tony, and business demand, but actually, of course, within any company, you can supply as much as you like, and you can do that as well as you like, but you have to also to support demand among colleagues with the right sorts of line management and support, I think.
Yeah, Catherine, that's great. Thank you. Neil, let me come to you and pick up on the point that Catherine made that Tony referred to earlier, which is how genuine commitment is reskilling, how genuinely we believe as sort of middle managers, as SMEs, that there is still potential in people who've been with our company for a long time. Is that something, from your vantage point at Severn Trent, or that you think you've seen change over time?
I think it has, actually. I think organisations, as you've seen the development of around corporate responsibility into ESG, and you're starting to see this focus on kind of impacting society. I think redeployment and retraining and reskilling is actually a fundamental part of that. And it was touched on earlier, this idea that you can just hire people in when you need them and fire the ones that you don't need, and it's up to the state or someone else or the market to try and work out what happens to those people afterwards, I think is probably changing quite a bit. And you can probably break it down in terms of retraining or reskilling to three groups. There's that sense of, I want to learn new skills and I want to go and do a different career. That's kind of one group. There's my job's changing because technology is coming in and that's changing the way I need to do things, or processes changing, is another group. And then the third group is, my job doesn't exist anymore because something fundamental has changed that. And I think it's that third group that we probably need to do more focus on, our responsibility as organisations to stepping in and saying, so what should we be doing for those people to help redevelop them? And we had a recent programme at Severn Trent where we were changing the way in which we did work, changing the way in which we organised it, and we were able to redeploy everybody who wanted to be redeployed as a part of that because they didn't want to or couldn't do the new job. But in order to do that, you have to change the way in which you think about kind of suitability and fit, and how much skills someone needs to have in order to do a job and how much you can train. And I think that probably still needs a bit more focus and a bit more work across businesses. I think sometimes we do, maybe look at people who've been in an organisation for 15 or 20 years and say, well, can they really learn new skills? Can they really develop onto this? And sort of our experience and my evidence is, yes, absolutely they can if they've got the right mindset and the right support in order to do that. But you've got to be willing as an organisation to put the investment in place to help them to do it as well.
Yeah, and look, Severn Trent's quite a big beast, so I know you spent a lot of money recently on a new training academy. Have you got any rough idea of how much of that training will be delivered to sort of new starters and how much of it is going to go to people who are already in the workforce?
Yeah, so absolutely. We opened a training academy at the beginning of the year. It's a kind of £10 million investment in not just our workforce, but our local communities as well, and supporting them in training and supporting them in developing their employability skills. And the reality is that the vast majority of the training is on our existing workforce, because of the nature of the work we do. It means we have to make sure that people's skills are constantly up to date as technology comes in the way that you maybe detect and fix leaks, for example, or the way in which we manage, electric vehicle fleet is a really good example that we touched on earlier. And making sure that our workforce is fully skilled to be able to deliver for customers. So that, I would say, is a good 80% of the investment that we do. The other 20% probably is around apprenticeships, graduates, new starters coming in and making sure that they've got the skills and the understanding to be able to fulfill their jobs properly.
Okay. Tony, let me come back to you for a second, because as I said before, I was struck in your big speech last Monday that you were quite critical of the apprenticeship levy. Yeah, I think you called it a failing levy, a missed opportunity. Is one of your worries that it's distracting attention and money from this sort of lifelong agenda or is it just failing in its own terms?
Look, I think there's two things going on, both of which merit attention. One is increasing funding for and quality of apprenticeships, right? We all believe in that. The other one is essentially a levy to invest in the skills that we need as an emerging economy. The problem is they're being conflated into one place. So what you've got is essentially, for some people who are really using the apprenticeships and for whom apprenticeships is right for their business, it's a levy. For everybody else, it's just a tax, because essentially they're not deploying the funds into the skills needs of their business, either the short-term skills needs, and boy, do we have some of those in our economy right now, or the long-term skills needs, be those decarbonisation, so on. In other words, it's just not flexible enough to be deployed the way you'd like to deploy it. So you've got folks like Neil and Linda, whose job is to invest in the capability and training of their workforce, who basically have seen, money taken away from them to be deployed against skills, which I guess if you're Neil and Linda on the face of it is great news, right? Probably the FD doesn't like it, but you guys love it. But then you can't use it, right? You can't put the money to work.
Yeah.
And so it's just it's just a missed opportunity, right? And actually, when we talk to members, it's not really the notion of levy that they mind so much, right? They accept the principle that that's an interesting intervention and it's a way to get more investment in skills. It's the fact they can't use the money. And so that's our problem with the apprenticeship levy. We need to maximize flexibility so that we can use it to deploy it against skill needs. And don't get me wrong, we need, apprenticeships and that category of worker and that age of worker and that idea of technical development is absolutely right. But the fact that you then have to jump through a gazillion hoops about what that needs to look like to be constituted as high quality skills, that's the problem. And so very, very frustrating for many companies to be willingly deploying levy money, but not actually able to deploy it at all. It's just a tax.
Yes, Linda, I could hear you furiously agreeing with Tony there. So what's been your experience of the apprenticeship levy?
Yes, absolutely. And I think, again, I'm going to bang the drum a little bit for Leonardo, because we have been running apprenticeships for decades, literally decades. So, we're not complaining about having to train young people up, far from it. That's one of the main sources of new blood into our organization. It really matters to us. So we've been involved from the consultation period, and I sat in on many meetings when the idea of the levy was discussed and what it may or may not do. And I think that what's happened is that it was rushed through. There are certain aspects of it that even now don't work particularly well. And we have all accepted, or large companies like mine have accepted, that it is a tax we have to pay. No one's complaining about that. But I think where we are complaining is that it doesn't have the flexibility we would like. So let me give you an example. I sit on the AGP, which is the Aviation and Aerospace Growth Partnership, on their people group. And one of the pieces of work that we had undertaken was to try to influence the way that any surplus money that was not used by an employer could be spent. If you remember right at the beginning, it was 10% of your total contribution could be given to your supply chain. And we believe that wasn't enough. So we actually managed to change that to 25%. But there are still so many restrictions about how that is used that, the levy, the surplus just isn't going to where it needs to go. So, from my point of view, there ought to be more recognition that we could do so much with this funding from the point of view of being able to support supply chain, support SMEs within the sector or elsewhere, and really give a whole leg up to others as well, not just the large companies, but using that fund in a way that actually benefits the sector, and dare I be cheesy about it, but UK PLC at the same time.
Neil, this feels like another example of what I think Tony was talking about at the beginning, which was this disconnection between supply, training skills, and demand for it. Is that your experience of the apprenticeship levy?
Yeah, so I mean, absolutely, very similar to Linda. We've got a long track record of apprenticeships at Sept. We're big fans of apprenticeships. I think it's a really good way of providing skills. As Tony alluded to, the kind of professionalisation of the standards and the tightening of that has been a really, really important part in establishing the credibility of apprenticeships. But my golly, it takes a long time for a standard to get signed off, and so that disconnect between need and delivery is really quite long. And then, you know, I think it's probably fair that when we talk about apprenticeships, we all imagine a 16-year-old or a 17-year-old or an 18-year-old, and the problem that we're talking about today around reskilling and retraining, you know, quite often the apprenticeship standards and the approach there doesn't meet that specific need, because it is a comprehensive package around a particular job rather than it is necessarily about skills. And so, you know, it feels there's an opportunity to be able to use levy to try and answer some of these challenges and some of these questions, because it does a good job, but it's only part of the problem. It answers part of the problem, and there's a much greater challenge that I think business is facing into, and it could be an amazing opportunity to support that.
Yeah, and if I put you in charge of trying to reconnect supply and demand of training and skills, again from your vantage point, how would you start to reconnect the two?
So the starting point is I think business needs to be given more responsibility for actually delivering the training and skills and the solution. I think it is too hard to expect the cycle in which training and education organisations operate to be able to have the level of agility and speed that is needed by business. And that's not a criticism, that's just you know, it's like a penny farthing. You've got different wheels rotating at different speeds, yet they're kind of connected. And I think, you know, we need to find a better way of empowering organisations to do that. You know, flexibility in how they use the levy could be a good example of how that's done. And I would personally focus, you know, a lot of education around core skills and around, if you like, kind of employability skills, around literacy, numeracy, digital skills, but actually leave more of the specifics to organisations. And I think that means that business needs to step up into that space as well. But it's the only way that you can get the level of agility, I think, that is needed, because the sign-off of qualifications and the sign-off and standards and the lead periods that's required to do that is just far too long to be able to effectively deliver.
Okay. Catherine, let me just come out. I can see you nodding as well there, Catherine. I think it was Linda who mentioned earlier on, when we were kind of thinking about where the push for these changes that we're talking about might come from, that employees' expectations are changing, that people are no longer content to sort of passively sit through their sort of, you know, mid-career. What's your experience at Phoenix about expectations?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think it's interesting, isn't it? I think that actually this question, Neil, I think you were very clear with your sort of 3 different types of jobs and their different sorts of you know, reskilling implications. And I think, you know, where you can, you know, see your job disappearing, where you can see a really clear path to a need for some very specific and technical skills development to be able to do your job well and to be able to progress in that particular career, then expectations and demand for people, it's, you know, it's fairly clear. Where though, and actually that third group of people who might just be wanting to think differently, wanting to try something new, recognizing some transferable skills that they might like to take to a different industry or a different part of the business. You know, business like Phoenix has got a huge range of different sorts of connected opportunities where there are pathways, there are sort of natural pathways as we've spoken about, but they're perhaps not, you know, not immediately obvious to everybody. That's where the prize is, I think, to build demand among staff. And you can only do that with, you know, really good quality conversations with people about their careers. And I think that prize is just huge. We have, you know, in Phoenix, we've got 7,000 colleagues with a you know, tremendous range of skills. And just as you said, you know, the opportunity for us to transfer people to different parts of the business, to help them stay with us, not just for a job, but for you know, for a career for life, huge return on investment opportunity for us. And that's what we have to build and grow, really have not just those structured opportunities, you know, there on a website to choose between, but really have those conversations for that third group. I think that's the agenda that's front of mind for us at the moment.
Yeah. And presumably, Catherine, not just an opportunity if you do, but a threat if you don't.
Absolutely. Yes, quite. Of course.
Yeah. Tony, let me just flip back to you, because there's all kinds of interesting bits of evidence coming in. As you started us thinking about that disconnect between supply and demand, an apprenticeship levy that doesn't seem to be working, isn't fit for the kind of purposes that you have in mind. Government active in putting the skills white paper through Parliament, but still a sort of, as Neil was saying, a kind of sluggishness, in trying to marry up the skill side and the demand side. What's your sort of scorecard on the level of government engagement, thinking, and sort of proactivity on this important agenda?
Kerry, that's one of those soft questions that leads a guy like me into trouble, isn't it? Which is the sort of give the government a scorecard. Look, I think it's clear that the government is starting to recognize the need for an employer-led skills approach, right? That's what the bill is now about. And whether or not it's through the lifelong learning entitlement or local skills improvement plans, even the college business centers, I think there's a recognition. Government have gone around the houses. They've heard some stuff. They're totally tone deaf, I'm afraid, to the apprenticeship levy flexibility point, and that's going to need to change. I think they're totally misunderstanding skills shortages at the moment. So again, I think they're just in the wrong place on a couple of the issues, but they are starting to hear, I think, this idea of an employer-led voice, and you can see some of it in the bill. And so we want to work with them on the bill. But look, I think if you turn around and say we're going to be competing in the next 10 years around things like digital skills, around skills for the green economy, we're going to be out-competed on skills by other countries whose investment in skills and education budgets is far stronger, then we're going to need more fundamental answers. And I can't give you a perfect answer for how that's going to happen. So look, I think, do they know some of the problems, and are they trying? Yes. So, they get whatever, I'm trying to think what's the right way to score them. They get a green for that. Are they aware of some of the sort of longer term strategic issues? Yes. Doing something about it, in my view, no. So I give them an orange for that. And in terms of short-term skill gaps in the economy and labor and skill shortages that we have and flexibility on those answers, I'd give them a red for that, because I just think they're not engaging with the problem. We all know we need a different sort of approach to the structure of UK workforce post-Brexit, but this idea that actually we stand firm and we expect the market to solve its skills shortages, it's just totally unrealistic.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for engaging with that difficult question. Is it a challenge for the CBI to separate out? It's quite easy to ascribe some of the difficulties we've got at the moment to short-term shocks, to Brexit, to the pandemic, to global factors that aren't going to be repeated. Is it a challenge for you to try and point out that actually, yes, these are short-term shocks, but there's a bedrock underneath which has really got to be addressed as well?
No, not really, because what we do is talk to people on this call and people in the audience. We spend a lot of time talking to members about these skill shortages, and people that do Linda and Neil's job are very easily placed to be able to discriminate between what's a short-term problem, what's a long-term structural problem, what's cyclical, what's structural. Which is why, when this labor shortages thing came out, we said straight away, this is a 2-year problem, right? This is not going away because of, everybody thought the government looks at aggregate figures and says, well, actually, in aggregate, furlough ends, there's another 1 million or so come back into the workforce. The skills problems, which of course is ludicrous to anybody that looks at the granular details of that, right? The people that become available are in completely different regions of the country where the needs are, right? As I've often said, you can't turn baggage handlers into butchers or shopkeepers into chefs. So there's a mismatch of the supply and demand side. And I think it's actually very easy to get underneath that by not just paying attention to sort of macroeconomic data about the labor market up and down, but talking to businesses and sector bodies that are all in our membership about actually what's really going on here. You know, did people go back to European countries after the pandemic? Yes. Was it because of the pandemic rather than Brexit? In large case, some of it was. But are they coming back again? No. And people like Neil and Linda know that because they know these people and they talk to these people and they have to make planning assumptions. So it's actually quite easy, Kerry, when you get into the microeconomics of company decision making and company experience to understand why that macro picture that government looks at is misplaced.
Okay. Linda, let me come back to you just for the couple of minutes we've got left, because there was something, we've talked a little bit about the role of government, and we've talked quite a lot about the role of individual companies in this. But actually, when we were talking before the call, you pointed us to something else, which was the value of collaboration between companies on this, as well as decisions taken within a company. Just expand on that a bit. What did you have in mind there?
Yes, absolutely. I mentioned earlier the Aviation and Aerospace Growth Partnership, which I sit on, but I'm also the chair of the skills group for the Defence Growth Partnership, and that's a collaboration of initially 16 major companies in defence and aerospace who work together on issues that we have in common. So I think, you know, there is a forum there that brings together some fairly large influential employers, and we try to act in the best interest of the sector rather than individually as companies. What I was thinking of was, from a skills perspective in particular, what I was thinking of is the work that we're doing in the skills group, which has been, over the last 2 years, we've been looking at digital skills in particular and trying to find a way that we can provide a platform to our employees that allows them to bring their skills up to date in a kind of modular, user-friendly way. So that's been very important. But one of the real benefits, I think, of doing something in this forum is the fact that we made a decision at the outset that we wanted to do it for the sector, not just for the 16 or 14 companies sitting around the table, but for the sector. So this platform, once we are in the position to release it, will be made available to SMEs and the supply chain companies. And I think that's really important because as a sector, we can act individually, and, you know, competition's never far from the debate at some point. So, you know, we're not hiding from the fact that at times we compete. But I think when we're talking about basic skills, then you know, we are better together than apart. And you know, if we can bring our supply chain up the ladder, up the learning chain simultaneously, then we all benefit from that. So that's where I think collaboration really has a big part to play, in particular in skills, and it sits separate to the concerns of the individual employers. And I think that that's a really important, that's a valuable point.
I think, astonishingly, given I hadn't seen the clock, that may also be our last point, Linda. So we are out of time, so thank you for that. It's actually a very, very good note to end on, I think, because I can see Neil nodding in agreement as well. They must have some similar experience at Severn Trent. So let me just steer you towards the link that Amy has put in the chat to look at the CBI's Transforming Work Week to see what else is going on this week. We'll be back here with another webinar on Wednesday morning, but for now, let me say thank you to Linda from Leonardo, to Catherine from Phoenix, to Neil from Severn Trent, and as ever to Tony from the CBI. Thank you all for taking part. It's been a really interesting conversation, and we'll see you all again on Wednesday morning.